Hey everyone, I'm Brittany Jones Cooper, and welcome back to Build. The classic fairy tale features a princess waiting to be rescued by her prince. But the book Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls reinvents fairy tales, inspiring girls with the stories of 100 bold and heroic women, from Oprah to J.K. Rowling. Today we're joined by Elena Favilli, who co-authored the second volume of this empowering children's book. Welcome, Elena.
Thank you.
Sorry. It's Elena. Not Elena.
It's Elena.
Yes.
It's fine.
I knew I was going to mess that up. Thank you so much for joining us. I just read this entire book, and I love it. So I love that you guys came out with the second edition, because I think people are really going to enjoy it. But for people who are less familiar, how did the first edition come into fruition?
Yes. So the first book came in 2016, and the format is the same. It's a collection of 100 bedtime stories about extraordinary women, past and present, from Cleopatra to Serena Williams. And so the idea was to create this collection of bedtime stories, very different from the traditional bedtime stories that we're used to. So these bedtime stories are not featuring princesses waiting to be saved by a prince, but are featuring real women who are in charge of their lives and are doing amazing things. So there's painters, scientists, athletes, inventors, trombonists, judges. So every profession that you can imagine from every time and also from every corner of the globe. So it's a very global and inclusive collection of stories.
What I love is that you and your co-author, Francesca Cavallo, is that how you say her name, seem to be very impressive women yourselves. You guys are the CEO of Timbuktu Labs. So really quick before we get into the book, can you explain what that is? Because I think it's really cool.
Yeah. So Francesca Cavallo and I, we also own a company called Timbuktu Labs, which is the publisher of this book series, which we started a few years ago in San Francisco, and we're now based in LA. And basically, it's a media company. So we're producing media in different formats. Now, mostly in the book format, but across all kinds of platforms, really. So now the new project that just came out, it's a podcast, which is called Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. And so, of course, it's based on the same stories of the book series. But yeah, the idea is to build a media company that is creating meaningful storytelling experiences for millennial women.
And Timbuktu Labs published the book, and so you got to be really hands-on throughout this entire process. What was that like for you?
Oh yeah, definitely. We launched the book with a crowdfunding campaign in the first place, so that was of course, a very transparent process where our readers, our audience was with us from the very beginning through the end. And so they got to witness from the inside how you put a book together, and not just creatively, but then also in the physical part. So we, of course, then we had to choose and find the right printer to go check out the printing facility, to check out the printing process. So it's cool. When you launch something on Kickstarter, I think that for the audience, it makes it very interesting because they get to see how you really bring it to life.
Definitely. People are really involved in the process, especially, this is the book, the second volume, very beautiful. I love it. And in it, you feature some stories from amazing women like Oprah, J.K. Rowling, Sojourner Truth, Agatha Christie. It's such an impressive list. How did you pick and choose who would be involved?
Yeah, it's always a tough choice because, of course, there's so many extraordinary women, so there's always someone that you need to leave out. So usually we try to include women from different geographies, so we didn't want this book to be just about American women or European women. Also, we wanted to include women who could represent completely different backgrounds and cultures. So that children, and especially young women and young girls, could see the variety of professions that is really just there for them to take if they want to. And then we try to choose also those stories that could be more interesting from a child's perspective and that could have some more interesting details. Yeah. So I would say that those are the main criteria.
And there's some very famous women, obviously, but there's also a lot of kind of lesser known women that I was surprised to read about. One was a young girl in Mongolia who has an eagle and she hunts with her eagle.
She's an eagle huntress.
Yeah, and she's still, I think, only like 13 or she's very young now. So how did you find those sort of very unique stories?
We always try to include stories about young girls, so contemporary young girls, because we think that, it's important to show that rebel girls have been around us, but are around us. They are our sisters, our mothers, our classmates. And so this example of Aisholpan, this 13-year-old girl from Mongolia, is a great example of this, right? She's she lives in a country where only men can become hunters, and one day she says to her dad, "You know what? I think I'm good at this. I wanna do it too." And she convinces her dad, and so he takes her with him in the mountains, and they found an eaglet, and then she trained it, and they become friends. And so it's an incredible story, and in this case we found it. I think this one was just online research mostly, it's always a combination of historic research, of course, for some of the historical figures, and online and journalistic research. Yeah.
You're also uncovering stories of women who I think were lost in history, which is something I thought was really cool. There's one woman named Corrie ten Boom, a watchmaker during the Holocaust, who ended up kind of hiding and saving 800 Jewish people from persecution.
Yeah.
And I've never heard her name, and she sounds like this really amazing woman. So again, how did you find those? Was it just research?
Yeah, of course. There's a long research process that comes before we start writing, and stories like that really come up just because you try to look at history from different angles and perspectives. And so even if you think about such an important historic moment like the Second World War, you're like, okay, let's see if there's some women that were completely forgotten in this moment, in this particular moment in history. And so that's how, it's like a lens that you use, and you start looking around you with that lens, and then suddenly you discover stories that you didn't even know they existed. And I didn't know that story before starting to research this book.
Yeah. I found myself with several of the stories going into what I call a deep dive on Google, where I would just go. I went for like 30 minutes just researching these women because I was so impressed by just the little bit that I read that I wanted to know more. So I think a lot of people are going to have that reaction. It's probably for you like trying to choose a favorite child, but is there one story in this book, one woman in this book that really is your favorite, that really every time you read it, you're just in awe?
So there's one in book 2, which I think it's an awesome story. It's actually an American woman, Virginia Hall, not necessarily super famous. She was she had a wooden leg, and nevertheless she became the most dangerous spy during World War II, and so she has such an amazing and adventurous life that also she gave a nickname to her leg, Cuthbert, which I think it's hilarious, and it's one of those stories that usually children love as well.
Yeah. Have you seen that show Drunk History by any chance?
No, I haven't.
It's this really funny show where they have drunk people retell stories in history, and they actually profiled her. So when I saw her in the book, I was like, yes, I knew who she is. And she's a really cool, she's laughing, you've heard of that? Yeah. You want to know my favorite story?
Oh, yes,
Vivian Mayer.
Oh, wow, yeah.
It was so touching. Long story short, it was this woman who was a nanny for 40 years, but during that entire time, she was taking photos on the streets of Chicago. And when she got a little older, those photos were sold, and they're the most beautiful photos I've ever seen. And so I read her story in here and then went into one of those deep dives. And again, I feel like she's this important woman, important artist that I just discovered through this book. You remember her story?
Yeah, and the crazy thing about this story, I think, is that nobody knew about her and her work while she was alive. So, she was just, apparently she was just a regular nanny in Chicago and then in New York, but in reality she was this amazing artist. So, it's actually one of my favorites too.
A lot of these women led complicated, controversial even lives. They were rebels pushing against the grain. Were there any stories that were particularly difficult to sort of sum up for a child's consumption? Was it hard to sort of put in this little box any of the stories?
Yeah, there were some. There were more difficult than others, especially because each story is just one page long. So of course, you need to make it quite short. There was one in particular in book one. It's the story of Koi Matis, this young transgender girl, and so it's the story of how she decided to become a girl, and how she told that to her parents and to her school, and the fight that she had to fight to convince her school that she could use the girls' bathroom instead of the boys' bathroom. So of course that's such an important story to tell, even to a young audience. But you need to be responsible because you never want to shock them or to scare them. So you need to find the right way to tell that story.
And is there ever any hesitation about tackling topics that you know some parents might be concerned about? Like you said, transgendered Americans or people. There's stories about lesbian women in here. Mm-hmm. Was that ever a thought to not show those stories, or you're like, no, this is true?
No, this was a very intentional choice. We always try to. We don't want to shock children, but we don't want to shy away from important topics. So, it was actually a very deliberate choice to include stories that could be potentially controversial or difficult. Yeah. And
throughout the book, I think one of the coolest things I saw was how women in the book inspired other women. So there's a story on Alex Weck, who's a model, and then there's later a story about Kudia Diop, who said that she was inspired by Alex Weck.
Yeah.
So did you see that thread often?
Yeah, we try to build these connections because it's amazing, like lift each other up, right? So it's amazing to see when that happens in reality. And even in the story about Beyoncé, she talks about how she was inspired by Madonna when she was young, and so it's really incredible to see how much representation matters and how much role models matter. So that's why I think it was important to have a book that, for once, is showcasing a different kind of many different kinds of women.
And the illustrations too are really phenomenal. And there's multiple illustrators throughout the book. So can you tell me how you selected those artists? Because the art is very different. It also seems really perfect for each woman too, in some way.
Yeah, so we worked with 60 female illustrators from all over the world. And the idea, again, was to use, first of all, to use this book as a platform for female talent as well. So we really wanted to showcase the best female talent in illustration right now. And also, we wanted these women to be represented in all their uniqueness. So that's why we have so many different styles, as you were saying. We really wanted to showcase their differences, because one of the issues that we have in media is that women tend to be represented always in the same way, and so it looks like there's only one way to be a woman, to be female, right? And instead, of course, women come in many shapes and in many different ways, and it's important that children know that this difference does exist in reality, and it can and it should be celebrated.
In the back of the book, you actually leave a space for each of the readers to write their own fairy tale about themselves and draw their own illustration. So why was that important for you guys to add?
That was important because we really want children to think that that they can be rebel girls, first of all, and that extraordinary women are around them all the time. So they should think of themselves as rebel girls, because being a rebel girl at the end of the day simply means be in charge of who you are, who you want to be in charge of your decisions, of your life, and so it's important that they start thinking about themselves in that way.
Do you think the timing of this book is perfect because of what's going on in society with the Time's Up and the Me Too and all of those things. Do you feel like this book is sort of a kind of a feedback of that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think that this book became like a totem for so many people. So the first edition came out right after the presidential election. So we saw how for many people it became this beacon of hope, like something that they could hold on to and say, oh, these are our values, we're gonna make it, and something better will happen at some point. And then, of course, this past year with the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement, it's again even more relevant, and because of course the theme of violence and sexual assault is a big part of these stories sometimes, unfortunately. So it's definitely, I think it has captured the imagination of a large public right now, also for this reason.
And Hillary Clinton was in the first edition, right?
And Hillary Clinton was in the first edition, and she wrote us a letter because we sent her the book. And so she sent us a message to say thank you.
That's awesome. What did it feel like to get that letter in the mail? You're like, oh my God.
Oh, we were pretty happy. Yeah.
In the dedication of the book, you say, "Don't step back, and everyone will move forward," as sort of a urging to young women. So overall, what do you hope is the takeaway for young women and women of all ages?
Yeah, of all ages. Yeah, because this is a book that actually, women of all ages are actually reading, and well, the main hope is that they after reading this book they feel maybe not as scared as before, and they feel empowered, and like they feel that they can too try to do something, whatever it is, big or small, it doesn't matter, but something that matters to them.
Yeah. It's a simple message, but I feel like it's something we have to repeat and remind people of over and over again.
Yeah, so it's not a given for most of women, yeah.
Yeah, especially women around the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's a good time to open up to the audience for some questions.
Hi, I was wondering, have you ever or would you ever write fictional stories about rebel women?
Yeah, I think, it's definitely one thing that we're thinking about right now. Of course, we think that we've only scratched the surface with this first collection, because again, there's so many real stories about real women that I think still need to be told, but definitely fictional stories, it's something that we love, and I can see how even some of these stories could kind of spin off and become their own stories and in other media and formats.
After the first book, did any of the readers reach out and send you story ideas for women in their lives? I mean, did you get any? Because I would imagine people are like, oh, I know somebody amazing who should be in this book.
Oh yeah, that happens all the time. And especially in book 2, we actually collected a lot of suggestions, and a lot of the stories featured in book 2 came from our readers. For example, we have one about this Irish pilot, Lillian Blunt. It's a story that came in from one of our readers. The story about the Black Mambas, this squad in South Africa, female-led, and they try to protect rhinos. So amazing stories that we couldn't have known otherwise, but that we now discovered because we have now this global community of rebel girls around the world that just, they write to us and they send us pictures, they send us links, and so it's amazing. So the second book has been more collaborative and in the selection.
Do we have another question?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Nice to meet you. I just posted something about you this morning on my Instagram, and somebody wants to asking you, what do you think a man could learn from a woman? And also, what is your favorite women author?
My favorite author. Well, I have many favorite female authors. Probably right now, my favorite is Zadie Smith. And what was the first question? I'm sorry.
Oh, somebody asking you, what do you think a man could learn from a woman?
Oh, wow.
So much.
So many things.
So many things.
Where do I start? Well, I think that, they can learn to be, one good thing could be to learn to be more compassionate and more open and be able to listen more, which I think are all qualities, important qualities, typical and very common among women, not so common among men.
Listening, if you guys missed it, listening is very important. And I think we have one more question.
Hi, I was just wondering, who are the women that inspired you, whether it's from the books you wrote or somebody, from your life?
Yeah, Serena Williams is one of those role models that constantly inspires me, and in my real life, then there's a politician, an Italian politician that is featured in book 2, and her name is Emma Bonino. She's not very well known here, but she's been leading all the major civil rights fights, and so she's been a big inspiration for me throughout my life.
I read her story, yeah, she's amazing. And this book, guys, is filled with so many amazing stories. Like I said, I really enjoyed it, and so it was really great chatting with you today. And make sure you guys go out and get your copy of Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, and give it up for Elena.
Thank you.